Good morning again to you, friends, on this first Sunday in Black History Month. Here we are at our second nearly impromptu virtual worship service. We've been hoping that the streets would get plowed more or the temps would rise faster, but alas, for some of us, it's been over 7 days since we've stepped outside of our homes. For many folks, this time here in Memphis feels like a cold reminder of that COVID time, back when we stayed homebound for days, weeks, even months on end. Some of us have been retraining the muscles we developed during that COVID time as we've stepped back into using Zoom more or FaceTime more, as we've tried out a new Netflix series with our partner or a TikTok dance with our kids. And for many of us, we've made our peace with this time, tucked away at home in our pajamas. Maybe even we've gotten comfortable, received it as a welcome reprieve from the hustle and bustle of an otherwise busy schedule. Imagine for a moment, though, being so comfortable that no matter the road conditions or the temperatures outside, you stayed inside. Imagine for a moment remaining not only in your home, but in your bedroom for days and days more, until in fact you lose count and at some point look up to find yourself having spent more than 6 months in the exact same room. This isn't just some weird spin on a Rip Van Winkle story. This is, in fact, a social phenomenon that has become so prevalent that it's been given a name: hikikomori. Since the late 1990s, psychologists have studied this phenomenon in depth. First observed and described in Japan, hikikomori refers both to this particular form of physical withdrawal and the individuals who withdraw themselves. Over the past 20 years, hikikomori have popped up beyond the shores of Japan as psychologists around the world find people who spend countless months, at least 6 and sometimes many more, confined to a single room in their homes. In many ways, hikikomori are a distinctly 21st century phenomenon. Only now, in the age of the internet, could a person spend their every waking hour in a single space, having their meals all delivered and their entertainment entirely streamed and their social interactions completely digitized. Only now, at a time when a person might go to work and then meet up with friends and then get their groceries all with the touch of a screen, could hikikomori grow to be a global phenomenon. A phenomenon that reminds us that we've designed a world where even physical isolation doesn't mean one has to feel bored or even alone. With a series of devices, we can both dive into the world and totally disengage from it. We can, on the one hand, keep up to date on the latest news. We can see who's done what and when. We can sign petitions and send letters to our political representatives. We can engage in social political activism with only a few clicks and swipes. And then, on the other hand, we can completely distract ourselves by watching TV or by playing Candy Crush or by scrolling through videos or by buying up knickknacks and even going on dates with AI romance bots. In a way, then, life in the 21st century means that we never actually have to experience the reality of actually being alone, regardless of whether or not anybody's actually around us. We can live our whole lives somewhere between absorption into the world and total escape from it. Somewhere between being wholly sucked in and completely spaced out. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, so what? What's so wrong with this picture? What's wrong with being constantly in the mix of what's happening, even digitally so? What's wrong with this century of moving between absorption and escape, this ebb and flow of attention and energy? Don't we live in a world that demands we look at it constantly? Don't we live in a time that requires we be aware? Shouldn't we be watching the news and scrolling through the updates and keeping abreast of all that's happening? And then, shouldn't we also take time for a break? Shouldn't we also give ourselves a reprieve by maybe watching some TV or texting with a friend or scrolling through video after video of cats playing with babies? Perhaps, perhaps this ebb and flow is just where humanity is going. And perhaps we all just need to let it be so. But I can't help wondering if perhaps this constant stimulation, this constant avoidance of just being alone, isn't actually a means of avoiding a deep kind of creative and necessary soul work. I can't help wondering if somewhere between being sucked into what's happening and spaced out from reality, there isn't something else we deeply need. At the end of the day, I can't help wondering about solitude. What I mean here is something more than just being physically alone. I don't mean sitting on your couch with a device in your face. I don't even mean necessarily reading a book or knitting a scarf all by your lonesome. Solitude, in its spiritual core, isn't just about being physically alone, especially in the 21st century. Solitude is about encountering the self. It is about confronting the you are when no one else is around, the you who's behind the performances and the personality traits, the you who is this mystifying mix of past experiences and present realities and future potentials. Solitude, true and abiding solitude, then, helps us meet the person we are outside of the noise of all the other voices that surround us. Is it any surprise, then, that we find in African American authors and artists some of the most powerful endorsements of being actually alone? The poet and activist Nikki Giovanni once said, "Solitude is where I place my chaos to rest and awaken my inner peace." The novelist and poet Maya Angelou declared, "I restore myself when I'm alone." Howard Thurman, the spiritual teacher and mentor to Dr. King, claimed that it is in the quietness of the heart that we discover the meaning of our lives. Black artist after Black author after Black activist all point us in the same direction. It is only when we can quiet the voices of a world that distracts and demands and maybe demeans us. It is only then that we actually encounter the truth of who we are, mysterious and ever-changing us. Living in a time when we can constantly avoid being alone means living in a time when we can easily avoid the raw truth of who we most deeply are. Hearing all this talk of the self, you might be thinking, "Tony, I already know who I am. I've had more than enough decades to figure all this out. I don't need solitude to hear my authentic self, you silly millennial. Been there and done that." Well, it's certainly tempting to think so, isn't it? It's certainly part of our culture to view ourself, our identity, as something we can one day finally figure out, as if at our core we're just puzzles that can at some point be finally solved. It's easy to rest into the notion that we can graduate from a need for solitude because we can rest in the comfort and the safety of knowing exactly who we are, what we want, what we like, what we dislike, what we believe, and what we think. However, if we take seriously the ancient idea captured in the book of Genesis, the idea that we are created in God's image, as Genesis proclaims, then that means, friends, we have been created in a mystery, an eternal unfolding that never resolves into something we can fully understand. We have been created, according to Genesis, in a bottomless depth that never stops surprising us. if we take seriously the idea that our soul is a reflection in some way of the infinity that is God, then the work of understanding our soul is also infinite. This was the truth that led the author of today's scripture reading, verses 1 through 3 of Psalm 62, to declare, "For God alone my soul waits in silence. From God comes my salvation. The eternal power and love is my rock and my rescue, my fortress. I shall never be shaken." The author of those verses understood that it was only in the eternal mystery of God that one can find salvation. And this author understood every journey to find God leads to silence and solitude. Okay then, how? How do we move into that experience? Well, one way is by choosing to go where a world like ours so rarely encourages us to go, into the truth of exactly who we are. When you engage with the work of folks like the Black sci-fi author Octavia Butler who once said, "Most people don't want to think, and they don't want to be alone long enough to think." When you engage with her luscious, made-up worlds, you engage with a person who confronted the hard work of hearing her own voice. When you engage with the work of someone like the Black abstract expressionist Norman Lewis who once said, "I'm Black, yes, but I'm an artist. I will not be limited to doing the kind of work that you think I should be doing." What you find is a person who took up the deep effort of being himself. As you explore the work of so many Black artists, in fact, what you very often find are people trying to reckon with a history of oppression without being defined by it. What you so often encounter are people striving to embrace the truth of their present while also trying to imagine a whole new future. You find people who are looking for a path that goes beyond getting totally absorbed by the needs of a hungry world on the one hand, and letting themselves space out from reality on the other. And that kind of work, that creative and energizing and revelatory soul work, that requires solitude. It requires, in the words of Psalm 62, waiting in silence for the power and love called God to come. Waiting in silence for the infinite mystery in whose image we are made. And so, as we endeavor to create our own lives, as we endeavor to together create and recreate the world around us, I ask you, do you take time for solitude? Do you let yourself be wholly alone? Do you give yourself permission to slow down and to wait in silence for God to show up? You don't have to be an artist or an author or an activist to do so, friends. Even if you don't think of yourself as a creative person, the truth of the matter is you are creating your life with each day you live and with every choice you make. And so the question is, will you take time to do so with intention, guided by the power and love that dwells within you? Or instead, will you get lost in your room? Will you get stuck within the four walls of a world that seeks to overwhelm and absorb and distract and define you? The next time you find yourself alone, rather than pick up your phone or turn on your TV, rather than even open up a book or take up your hobby, I invite you instead to just pause and to encounter yourself. Take just a few moments, perhaps, to ask yourself these three questions. What am I feeling? what do I want and why? What am I feeling? What do I want and why? Then, after a time of waiting, perhaps ask yourself finally, where are you, God, even in this? Perhaps, like the author of Psalm 62, in doing so, you might discover in your solitude a whole other kind of connection, a deeper variety of communion. As you visit and revisit your solitude again and again, perhaps you'll discover something that calls you deeper into the infinite mystery within you, the infinite mystery that is you. May it be so, and amen.